Keir Starmer just resigned as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and Britain is exploding into absolute pandemonium. This is not a scheduled transition. This is not a planned retirement. This is a sitting Prime Minister walking away from power in the middle of multiple crises, leaving the country in chaos and the government in ruins. Nigel Farage is declaring victory in the streets. Opposition parties are scrambling for power, and Britain is witnessing the most dramatic political collapse in modern history. The resignation statement was delivered moments ago, stunning even Starmer's closest allies, who had no warning this was coming. The Labour government has imploded, the Prime Minister is gone, and what happens next will determine the future of Britain for generations. You need to see exactly what triggered this resignation, why Starmer made this catastrophic decision, and what the explosion of celebrations and protests across Britain means for the country's future. The announcement came without warning, delivered through a brief televised statement from Downing Street that left the entire nation in shock. Keir Starmer stood at the podium looking exhausted and defeated, his voice barely containing the emotion, as he explained that he could no longer effectively serve as Prime Minister. He cited the mounting crises, the breakdown in constitutional relationships, the inability to govern with the confidence necessary to lead the nation. The statement lasted less than 5 minutes, contained no specific details about what finally broke him, and ended with Starmer walking away from the cameras without taking questions. Within seconds, the political world erupted. News alerts flooded phones across Britain, emergency broadcasts interrupted regular programming, and the reality set in that the country had just lost its Prime Minister in the most dramatic circumstances imaginable. The timing of this resignation is absolutely catastrophic for Britain. The country is dealing with multiple simultaneous crises. The constitutional confrontation with King Charles remains unresolved. The economy is struggling with inflation and stagnant growth. Public services are under immense strain. International relationships are being tested. And now, in the middle of all this chaos, the Prime Minister has simply quit. There's no transition plan. There's no obvious successor ready to step in. There's just a vacuum at the top of government at precisely the moment when strong leadership is most desperately needed. The resignation doesn't solve any of the problems Britain faces. It just adds a massive new problem to an already overwhelming list. Nigel Farage's reaction was immediate and triumphant. Within minutes of Starmer's announcement, Farage was in front of cameras declaring this a victory for the British people and vindication of everything he's been saying about Labour's incompetence. He didn't hold back, calling Starmer's tenure a disaster from start to finish and arguing that his resignation proves that the entire Labour project was built on lies and false promises. Farage positioned himself as the voice of the people who saw through Starmer from the beginning, who predicted this collapse, and who offer the only credible alternative to the failed establishment politics that just imploded. The celebration in Reform UK circles is unrestrained and unapologetic. They see this as their moment, their chance to reshape British politics with the discredited opposition parties in disarray. The scenes across Britain are extraordinary and unprecedented. In some cities, particularly those that voted heavily Conservative or Reform, there are celebration in the streets. People are literally cheering the news of Starmer's resignation, setting off fireworks, gathering in pubs to toast what they see as the end of a failed government. In other areas, particularly Labour strongholds, the mood is one of shock, disappointment and anger. Labour supporters feel betrayed by a leader who abandoned them in the middle of a fight. They're gathering not to celebrate but to express their fury at what they see as Starmer giving up when he should have kept fighting. The country is physically divided, with different communities having completely opposite emotional reactions to the same event. Inside the Labour Party, the reaction is reportedly one of complete chaos and recrimination. Most Labour MPs learnt about Starmer's resignation the same way the public did, through the televised statement. There was no advance warning, no consultation with the cabinet or senior party figures, no preparation for managing the aftermath. The WhatsApp groups and private channels are exploding with messages ranging from shock to fury to panic. Some MPS are defending Starmer's decision as the only honourable course given the impossible situation he faced. Others are condemning him as a coward who abandoned the party and the country when things got difficult, and everyone is asking the same desperate question: what happens now? And who possibly leads Labour and Britain out of this disaster? The constitutional mechanics of what happens when a Prime Minister resigns are clear in theory, but messy in practice, especially in these circumstances. The King must appoint a new Prime Minister, someone who can command the confidence of the House of Commons. Normally, this would be a senior figure from the governing party who steps in as caretaker while a leadership contest is organised. But Labour is in such disarray that there's no obvious unity candidate. Different factions are already positioning their preferred choices. The jockeying for power is happening in real time while the country watches, and the unseemly scramble for succession makes Labour look even more dysfunctional than Starmer's resignation already did. The opposition parties are having a field day, but are also calculating their next moves carefully. The Conservatives are demanding an immediate general election, arguing that Labour has completely lost any mandate to govern and that the British people deserve a chance to choose new leadership. They're positioning themselves as the stable, experienced alternative to Labour chaos. Reform UK is going even harder, with Farage arguing that both traditional parties are part of a failed system and that only his party offers real change. Smaller parties are making their own cases, each trying to capitalise on the vacuum of trust and authority that Starmer's resignation has created. The political free-for-all is intense and accelerating by the hour. The markets are in free fall. The pound is dropping sharply as currency traders react to the political instability of a country that just lost its prime minister without a clear succession plan. The stock market is experiencing significant selling pressure as investors flee uncertainty. International capital is pulling back from British investments until there's clarity about who will actually govern the country. The Bank of England has issued an emergency statement trying to calm markets, but when the Prime Minister has just resigned in chaos, central bank reassurances can only do so much. The economic cost of this political implosion is already mounting, and every hour without clear leadership makes it worse. The media coverage is absolutely wall to wall, with every outlet running continuous coverage of this unprecedented political event. Television cameras are stationed outside Downing Street, Buckingham Palace and key political venues, capturing reactions and trying to piece together what happens next. Radio shows are fielding calls from shocked and divided listeners. Online platforms are overloaded with traffic as people seek information and react to the news. International media is covering this as a major global story, broadcasting images of British political collapse to audiences worldwide. The damage to Britain's reputation is severe and immediate, with the country looking unstable and ungovernable to international observers. The question of what finally broke Starmer, what specific event or realisation made him decide to resign, is already the subject of intense speculation. Some reports suggest it was the accumulated weight of multiple crises with no path to resolution. Others claim there was a specific final straw, perhaps a confrontation with senior party figures who told him he'd lost their confidence, or a private meeting with the King that went catastrophically wrong, or polling data showing electoral annihilation if he continued. The official resignation statement gave no specifics, which allows everyone to project their own narrative onto Starmer's decision. But the truth will eventually emerge, and when the full story comes out about what drove a sitting Prime Minister to simply quit, it's going to be politically explosive. The celebrations that Farage is leading are becoming major public events, with thousands gathering in cities across England to mark what they see as the end of a failed Labour government. These aren't quiet expressions of satisfaction. These are full-blown victory rallies with speeches, chanting, and an atmosphere of political triumph. Farage is touring these gatherings, giving the same message everywhere. The establishment has failed, the people have won, and fundamental change is now possible. Whether this translates into electoral success for Reform UK remains to be seen. But there's no question that Farage is having his moment. He's the face of the opposition to everything Starmer represented, and Starmer's resignation gives that opposition enormous credibility and momentum. Inside Downing Street, the machinery of government is trying to continue functioning despite having no prime minister. Civil servants are still working, ministers are still technically in their posts, but the absence of political leadership creates paralysis on any significant decisions. Who has the authority to make major governmental choices when there's no prime minister? Who speaks for Britain in international forums? Who leads cabinet meetings and sets governmental priorities? These practical questions need immediate answers, but the political chaos makes those answers difficult to provide. The British state is temporarily leaderless, and that vacuum creates risks that go beyond just political embarrassment. The international reaction is mixing concern, confusion, and in some cases, barely concealed satisfaction at British difficulties. The United States is expressing support for British democratic institutions, while clearly concerned about stability in its closest ally. European leaders are watching nervously, worried about what British political chaos means for ongoing negotiations and relationships. Commonwealth nations are questioning what this means for their ties to Britain, and adversaries are amplifying the story as propaganda about Western democratic failure. Every foreign government that deals with Britain is now uncertain about who they're actually dealing with and whether commitments made will be honoured by whoever comes next. The question of general elections is now dominating political discussion. Opposition parties are demanding them, immediately arguing that Labour's collapse means they cannot possibly continue governing. But Labour, or at least some voices within the party, are resisting. They argue that they have a constitutional right to choose new leadership and continue in government until the next scheduled election. The constitutional position is that elections aren't automatically triggered by a Prime Minister's resignation. But the political reality is that governing without democratic legitimacy is nearly impossible, especially when the government is in such obvious disarray. The pressure for elections will only intensify, and at some point it may become politically unstoppable regardless of constitutional niceties. The potential Labour leadership candidates are beginning to emerge from the chaos, each with different appeals and different liabilities. Some are establishment figures who promise continuity and stability, but are tied to Starmer's failed government. Others are more radical voices who promise to break with Starmer's approach, but risk alienating moderate voters. Each potential candidate has supporters and detractors within the party, and the divisions are deep. The leadership contest, whenever it's formally organised, is going to be brutal. It will expose every disagreement, every policy dispute, every personal animosity that's been building within Labour, and it will all happen under the intense scrutiny of the media and public watching to see if Labour can possibly recover. The public opinion polling conducted in the immediate aftermath of Starmer's resignation shows a country in flux. Labour's support has collapsed, dropping to levels that would mean electoral catastrophe. But the beneficiaries of Labour's collapse are spread across multiple parties, with no single opposition party dominating. The Conservatives are recovering support, but not to the levels they'd need for a comfortable majority. Reform UK is surging, particularly in areas that feel ignored by traditional parties. Smaller parties are picking up voters who don't trust any of the main options. The fragmentation of British politics is accelerating, and the next election, whenever it comes, could produce results that make governing even more difficult. The economic uncertainty is creating real-world consequences beyond just market volatility. Businesses are postponing investment decisions until there's clarity about who will govern and what policies they'll pursue. International companies are reconsidering British operations if the country looks too unstable. The pound's decline is making imports more expensive, which feeds into inflation that's already concerning. The very real risk of economic crisis combining with political crisis creates a doom loop where each problem makes the other worse. Breaking out of that loop requires political stability that's nowhere in sight. The role of social media in amplifying both the celebrations and the anger is significant. Video clips of Farage's victory speeches are going viral among his supporters. Footage of angry Labour voters protesting Starmer's resignation is spreading among progressive activists. The algorithms that drive engagement are amplifying the most extreme reactions, the most inflammatory takes, the most divisive content. This creates an online environment that's even more polarised than the already divided real world. People are retreating into echo chambers that reinforce their existing views, making cross-partisan understanding and compromise even more difficult. The question of who actually governs Britain in this interim period is becoming critically urgent. Without a Prime Minister, the normal chain of command and decision-making is disrupted. The Deputy Prime Minister would typically step in as caretaker, but whether they have the authority to make major decisions or just keep things running until a proper succession is determined is unclear. This ambiguity creates risks, particularly if something happens that requires immediate governmental response. A crisis doesn't pause just because Britain doesn't have a functioning government, and the vulnerability this creates is genuinely concerning for national security and public safety. The emergency meeting of the Labour National Executive Committee to discuss the succession process is reportedly contentious and chaotic. Different factions are pushing different procedures for choosing Starmer's replacement. Some want a quick coronation of a unity candidate to restore stability. Others insist on a full democratic contest despite the time it would take. Still others are questioning whether Labour should even try to form a new government or should instead accept that elections are inevitable and prepare for opposition. The inability to even agree on how to choose a new leader, let alone who that leader should be, demonstrates how deeply dysfunctional Labour has become. The Conservative Party's positioning is carefully calibrated to look statesmanlike while aggressively pursuing power. Senior Tories are calling for calm and constitutional propriety, while simultaneously arguing that only they can provide the stable governance Britain needs. They're trying to avoid looking like they're celebrating national crisis while also making clear they believe they should be governing. The internal Conservative dynamics are also complicated, with different factions having different views on strategy and policy, but they're united by the scent of power and the belief that Labour's collapse gives them a path back to Downing Street. Farage is not being subtle or measured in his response. He's going full throttle, holding rally after rally, giving interview after interview, pressing his advantage with all the political skill he's accumulated over decades. He's arguing that both traditional parties are finished, that the British people have lost faith in the establishment, and that Reform UK offers the fundamental change the country needs. Whether enough voters buy this message to make Reform UK a governing party rather than just a protest movement remains uncertain. But there's no question that Farage has momentum, visibility, and a narrative that's resonating with significant portions of the electorate. The constitutional role of King Charles in this crisis is delicate and potentially dangerous. He must appoint a new Prime Minister, but that appointment should go to someone who can command Commons' confidence. If Labour cannot quickly unite behind a candidate, or if it becomes clear that no Labour figure can effectively govern, the King may need to consider other options. But every choice he makes will be scrutinised and politicised. After the recent confrontations between Crown and government, Charles cannot afford another controversial decision. Yet avoiding controversy while fulfilling his constitutional duties in these circumstances may be impossible. The impact on Britain's international relationships is already being felt. Diplomatic partners don't know who to talk to about ongoing issues. Trade negotiations are being disrupted by the absence of clear British leadership. Security cooperation requires governmental authority that's currently in flux. Every country that does business with Britain is uncertain about whether commitments will be honoured and whether new leadership will maintain existing policies or pivot dramatically. The damage to Britain's reliability as a partner is significant and may take years to repair. The psychological impact on ordinary British citizens is profound. Many people feel embarrassed about their country's political dysfunction being broadcast to the world. Others feel vindicated in their belief that the political system is broken. Still others are simply anxious about what this means for their jobs, their savings, their future. The sense of stability and predictability that people need to plan their lives has been shattered. The feeling that Britain is a well-governed country with functioning institutions has been undermined. These intangible costs of political crisis are difficult to measure, but very real in their impact on national confidence and social cohesion. The media analysis of what went wrong for Starmer is already producing competing narratives. Left-leaning outlets are arguing he was brought down by unfair media coverage, constitutional resistance from the monarchy, and sabotage from within his own party. Right-leaning outlets are arguing his policies were wrong, his leadership was weak, and his resignation is the inevitable result of Labour's failure to understand what the country needs. Centre outlets are trying to provide balanced analysis, but struggling with a situation where every aspect is contested. The fragmentation of media narratives mirrors the fragmentation of British politics itself. The question of what happens to Labour's policy agenda is now moot. Everything they were working on is effectively dead unless a new leader explicitly embraces it. The legislative programme that was supposed to define Labour's time in government has collapsed along with Starmer's premiership. Years of policy development and political positioning has been rendered irrelevant by one resignation statement. The waste of political capital and governmental energy is staggering, and the damage to Labour's brand as a party capable of governing effectively may be permanent. The scenarios for what happens next range from orderly succession to complete political breakdown. In the best case, Labour quickly unites behind a caretaker Prime Minister who stabilises the situation and leads the party into elections they have at least a chance of winning. In the worst case, Labour tears itself apart in a brutal leadership fight, the government becomes completely paralysed, and Britain slides into a genuine crisis that damages the economy and undermines social stability. The most likely outcome is somewhere between these extremes, but exactly where depends on decisions being made right now by people under immense pressure with limited information. The role of backbench Labour MPs is crucial because they're the ones who will ultimately determine who can command Commons' confidence. If they unite behind a candidate, that person becomes Prime Minister. If they're divided, the government falls and elections become unavoidable. The constituency pressures on these MPs are immense. Voters are demanding explanations, expressing anger, and in many cases threatening to abandon Labour entirely. MPs who want to keep their seats need to be responsive to constituent sentiment, while also trying to do what's best for the country. Balancing these competing pressures in the middle of a crisis is extraordinarily difficult.